Welcome to Conservation Fridays, where nature meets neighbor. I'm Jamie Lewis Hedges.
And I'm Rachel France. Today we're joined by Jeffrey Peterson and Jameson Hibbs. Jameson is the chapter coordinator for Back County Hunters and Anglers. Throughout his life,
Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Did I say Back County?
You said Back County. That's a different thing, different organization.
Oh, all right. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Throughout his life, he has developed a deep passion for a wide variety of outdoor recreational activities and conservation. He spent 16 years as a county parks director with 2 different departments in Indiana, where he learned the vital role that recreation and the outdoors attribute to both mental and physical well-being. Jeffrey is the board chair for the Michigan chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. He was born and raised in Shelby near Silver Lake Sand Dunes and currently lives in Grand Rapids with his wife and 2 teenage boys. Ooh, how's that going? While Jeffrey has a longtime love for fly fishing, fly tying, and backpacking, he came to hunting as an adult out of a desire to eat locally and sustainably. As a pastor for his professional life, he values the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual renewal that public lands, waters, and wildlife provide for people, regardless of what pursuits that get them outdoors. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely. This is exciting.
Well, we're really excited to talk to you both. I asked you to be here to talk about outdoor recreation, of course, and conservation. And May is Mental Health Month. So we talked about how this would be an exciting opportunity to discuss the mental and physical wellness benefits that the outdoors provides. But before we get into all that, Rachel, we're excited right now at Berry Conservation District about community science volunteers. Why is that?
Yes, Jamie. So the Berry Conservation District was just awarded a MyCore grant to survey and collect data in the Thornapple River watershed. We'll be holding volunteer training days later this summer and macroinvertebrate sampling events in the fall and the spring for the next 2 years to get a better understanding of the water quality of the Thornapple River and its tributaries. Once trained, the volunteers will join us in the river as we collect and identify these macros.
By joining forces with your local conservation professionals, you can support efforts in natural resource management that safeguards your community. If you're excited about macroinvertebrate surveys and other volunteer opportunities that are aimed at preserving the rural charm and great outdoors, we invite you to sign up with your local conservation district. To volunteer with Berry Conservation District, sign up at barrycd.org/give. That's BARRYCD.org/GIVE. So Jameson and Jeffrey, thank you very much again for being with us today. And we wanted to talk about the mental and physical benefits of outdoor recreation. Why don't we start off with Jameson and tell us, like, when you think about outdoor recreation and the benefits of that, what comes to mind?
That's completely open door right there, Jamie. So yeah, first, thanks again for having us on. I'm excited to have this conversation, and I've known you for a very long time, since our Indiana State days over 20 years ago now, and we've both been in.
You said 20 years. That hurts.
I know it does. Well, I didn't say the exact numbers. It's more than that. So we'll just say around 20 years. It's I don't like thinking about it either. But I know we've both been, really into outdoor rec for a very long time, and whenever I think about outdoor rec and how it really relates to our health and wellness, as a parks director there for a number of years for 2 different counties in Indiana, I really saw how people really kind of related to their local parks. The facilities I was over, they were camping destinations, they were fishing destinations. We had some hiking trails. We had the opportunity for people to really connect with their environment, which is something, as we all well know, that there's a very vast disconnect between our modern society, especially in the US, with our natural world, which is what a lot of us are here to kind of bridge that gap for a lot of people through our professions. It's what a lot of us have dedicated our lives to, really, so to speak. So, when I think about outdoor rec and what that provides, it's just a multitude of opportunities for people to get outside. It may be a local stroll through the local park. There may be some pollinator mixes out there. There may be a bird viewing, some butterflies, maybe just some bees, just being outside, catching fresh air is vitally important for people's psyche, for their mental health, mental wellness. And then of course, trying to get some sort of physical exercise, because we're all tied to these little devices in our hands now. We're all, everyone's competing for our time, whether it be on television or social media or even work. And we have to, it's vitally important that we have to make time for ourselves to decompress outside, not in the house, not in the couch, but it has to be outdoors. And I could go down so many different rabbit holes about why outdoor rec's important, but I think that kind of sums it all up right there.
What was for you personally, what was the moment in your life when it first came into your awareness how beneficial you spending time in the outdoors was?
I would go way back to, when I really recognized it, I would say it would have been in high school. I was lucky enough to grow up in a very rural neighborhood just south of Terre Haute, Indiana. We had a dead end. We were on a dead end street. Our house is the last house next to a little adjacent woodlot. And past that woodlot was a giant overgrown field of maybe about 50, 60 acres. And we would go up there and just run rampant through that whole area. And unknowingly, I didn't come from an outdoor oriented family at all, but unknowingly I was conditioning myself to be who I am now, connecting with nature in various ways. And I say really in high school, as we all know, we kind of progress as adolescents and you have those stressors of life, you find that solace somewhere. And there was a couple different locations that I had that I used to deer hunt at. But it was more than that, where, if I felt stressed and I felt like I had to escape and reconnect with myself, I would go sit at certain areas, whether it was hunting season or not. I would find myself going to that space, sitting there and just contemplating on life. So I would say it was probably about middle part of high school that I really understood my connection with it. And it's grown substantially from there.
Those little fence row, I think when you tell that story, I think of the fence row thickets, the little spots where you've got woods. For me, it was the forested area around that went around the property line on my grandfather's farm that we would run back in and build hideouts in and go out there. And it does turn into this contemplative place for you, even at a young age.
Absolutely. And for me, I had a couple spots. One was right next to the house. And, we have this thing called shifting baseline syndrome, when you think all this little woodlot full of honeysuckle is what the natural world's supposed to be. And that's what I grew up thinking nature was. But that was my escape, was, kind of crawling through these little honeysuckle thickets. Unknowingly, I was in the midst of this bad, economic issue or environmental issue. But there was also, I've always been fascinated by mountains. And there was one area down south of our house that I frequented often that was basically the top of a ridge line, and it just overlooked a creek. It was about a 30-foot drop to the creek, and it was the best elevation I could find. And I've always found myself being drawn to elevation. And so finding that perch, that was typically, when I had my driver's license, that was my go-to spot. And that's where I went. So I kind of overlooked a decent woodlot, a creek down below. You hear the running water, which I've always found, peace around water. And so that was it.
Jeffrey, how about for you? What was that first moment for you?
Man, it is incredibly similar to the stories that both of you have told. I think we're all, the three of us gentlemen on this call are probably around the same age, and we were probably the last generation to really grow up in an analog childhood. We kind of came of age with the modern digital era and the internet, and so yeah, growing up in a rural community, there was that kind of analog free range life, and so I too grew up with a lot of freedom, a pocket knife, a slingshot, a frog and spear, and a bike, and you could just take off in the morning and make your way wherever you wanted to go. And and the little town I grew up in, I mean, everybody was kind of looking out for you. And so there was a lot of freedom that came with that. And so as early as I can remember, the outdoors became that place of solace and reflection for me too. I remember even just, tough days at school, coming home and climbing the maple tree in my backyard, and just finding those little spaces where you could just really be at peace with yourself, have time to reflect. I even think of, my library as a kid growing up. The books I naturally gravitated to were like Hatchet, My Side of the Mountain, Where the Red
That is a
Fern Grows.
great books there.
Yeah, it's just something really compelling and beautiful about being out in wild spaces.
Definitely. I agree. I also started exploring and, I'm not too young. So you know, I had a bit of freedom at that age and was able to, go out in the woods behind the house and explore and just get away. And I've always been a bit of an introvert, but, I know kids today don't have as much freedom as we had. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of really maybe helping the adults help the kids get outside and help them explore and maybe refresh our own love for the outdoors and what that can do to help kids, especially in a day where some kids are spending 8 hours at school on a screen and then they come home and they want to spend another 4 hours or whatever.
I'll hop in real quick. A lot of this I can revert back to being a parks director and a lot of the programming we offered and recognizing that as an issue. And that certainly is. And as we've all kind of alluded to, there was a lot more freedoms we had when we were growing up that kids just don't have now. And I think a lot of that is, there are just a lot more issues out in society. I think post-COVID issues, people are a lot more concerned with, potential risk out there. We have to have our arms within reach of our kids. But at our parks department, both of them that I was at, especially at West Boggs, we try to create some good nature, not really nature-based programs, but more adventure-based programs where we could get people outside. Have fishing derbies, which is an easy way to get people reconnected with, R3 efforts, the food source, getting parents out there with their kids, teaching both the parents and the kids how to fish at the same time. But just, every opportunity we had there was just trying to explain the importance of the family unit coming outside together. And then I think really the more that, parents become familiar and accepting of their natural environment, the more they're willing to let their kids go outside by themselves. And I think, unfortunately, our conditioning of our society has been more indoors. And as younger people start to have kids, they're just more afraid of the outside world. I think coming at it from a BHA standpoint, we have some great R3 efforts, which is recruit, retain, reactivate. And we do that nationally, and we do that through each one of our chapters. And what that looks like, and a lot of our state DNR agencies have these R3 divisions as well. And that's geared towards getting adults back into hunting and fishing, whether they did whenever they were kids or they never have. The whole idea of R3 is to invite them back out. And that low barrier of entry is fishing. You can have it in your city park. You can go out to the most distant mountain range in Alaska and have fishing, but it's literally the most accessible form of outdoor rec and more of that consumptive user, so to speak, if you want to kind of procure your own meat source. And it's also cheap. It's a cheap way to get people introduced or reinvigorated back into the outdoors. So R3 effort's a great way. There's a lot of, besides BHA, a lot of other national conservation orgs do, mentored hunts geared towards youth and for adults. It may be for, minority groups, getting people from the inner city back into the outdoors. That's that type of connection. So there's a lot of great organizations doing that work through the R3 effort. So I invite everyone to, if anyone has any interest at all in volunteering with those, or if you're interested in, hey, I would love to have somebody show me how to do this. Look up some of those R3 programs.
I love that.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, Rachel, just around as I mentioned, I think we're some of the last generations to grow up in this kind of free range childhood where it didn't take so much intention. It was just kind of part of childhood was you took off and you made some mistakes. You got hurt a little bit. You came back home and you figured it out. And so, yeah, I have two boys. One is graduating high school next week. The other just finished his freshman year of high school. And it's taken a lot more intention on my part, raising them in the middle of Grand Rapids. There's so many great cultural opportunities raising kids in a city like Grand Rapids. The museums, the cultural diversity, the opportunities they have on that front are remarkable. It's taken more work to be intentional about finding spaces where they can get immersed in nature, where we can just leave the smartphones behind, and figure some stuff out as a family and give them some freedom. So I would say, part of it for us as modern parents is being okay with kids making mistakes. I remember the first camping trip where we gave our kids like the little pocket Swiss Army knives, that you lose in TSA every time you go through and forget you have it. And our littlest kid was 5 years old at the time, and we're like, "Hey, go have fun. Mom and Dad are going to set up the tent." And 3 minutes later, he comes back and the pad of his thumb's gashed open, and he's just bleeding everywhere. And and having that mindset to just go, yeah, that's okay. Let's get that cleaned up. What did you learn? And not freaking out about it, not making it a bigger deal than it needs to be. Those are just things that we've been intentional about. And one of the other things I'm incredibly grateful for is Grand Rapids Public Schools have a theme school program. And so both of our kids did their elementary school at C.A. Frost Elementary, which abuts to Blandford Nature Center, which some of your listeners in Barry County may be aware of. And so all throughout elementary school, they had 2 different 1.5-hour blocks every week where there was a designated environmental science teacher, and they did what was called E-Lab. And it just meant going out into Blandford Nature Center and seeing what happened. There's a curriculum, but I volunteered for both of my kids. I was fortunate to have the flexibility to do that. And I remember one class session where there was a fresh blanket of snow. We got like 3 inches overnight. And the E-Lab teacher said, well, kids, we were going to work on, whatever today's lesson was. Let's just go out and see what we can find. And as we were moving through the woods, we found this spot where there was the wing imprint of a barred owl. And you could see like the explosion in the snow where it had hit a vole or a field mouse. And so we talked about that. We measured the wing imprint. We followed the tracks backwards and found where that little rodent had come up from the subnivean zone under the snow. And like my kid still remembers that to this day, and you could have read a book or had a class about raptors, never would have had the same imprint that experience had. So, I don't know if in Barry County there are similar programs or even summer camp opportunities that provide that same kind of hands-on learning. But I would just really encourage parents to be keeping an eye out for those, be proactive about getting your kids in some of those settings where they can learn in an immersive setting.
So,
and real quick to add to that, if you don't care, for parents that aren't into the outdoors but want to try to get their kids, it does require an intentional effort, like Jeffrey was stating. But there are some great resources, great books out there. We before our kiddo was even born, we bought a book called Raising a Wild Child, which really incorporates a lot of nature-based play, but nature-based learning. Then there's also, Steve Rinella and the Meat Eater Crew just put out a great book about, kids' activities in the outdoors. And there's literally hundreds of ideas you can take your kids out in the woods. It may be a local, small, itty-bitty woodlot in the middle of the city, but you can still practice a lot of these same outdoor skills and initiatives and have fun and have those same experiences that Jeffrey had with his kiddo.
You talking about that was one of my kids has benefited from the Blandford Nature Center camps for certain. And here in Barry County, I would point folks to Pierce Cedar Creek Institute as a great programming opportunity for kids. And I'm thinking about the interplay here. The thing that we have not we've touched on, but we haven't specifically brought up is hunting and fishing in regards here. And we can kind of take that for granted, but I think to kind of set up our next conversation about BHA and public lands and all of that, I want to kind of focus for a second on how often that early experience or introduction for folks to the outdoors can be through fishing or hunting. And for many people, that story of existential opening up to the power of the outdoors is when you're out there, sitting with a parent in the deer stand, and taking or missing your first shot, or throwing a line and catching your first fish. What are your, for me, one of my kids' big experiences was just going out with game calls. We have a bag of game calls that we'll just go sit out on the ridge and practice and see what we can draw in. And we were, watching for a coyote or a fox predator and never saw one. But just about the time we were getting ready to leave, before we left, we looked left, looked right, looked up. And when we looked up, there was two great big old great horned owls sitting above us in the tree, looking down at us like, what is up with you? And my kid was just blown away by that. So can you touch on that for a second? Like getting your kids outdoors and how hunting and fishing is a great entree to that.
For us, and my wife and I had this conversation while, she was carrying Millie. Millie's our daughter. She's 10 now. To me, I wanted it to be our lifestyle. I did want it to be something we occasionally go do. I mean, it is my lifestyle. And I've incorporated that in my lifestyle, for many, many years as more of a forum for self-procurement. I want to participate in nature. I think it's the most raw form of what a human being actually is, from my perspective. I feel whenever I'm out there and I'm in pursuit, I like having that high risk, high reward, so to speak, as far as I am providing this for myself and my family. And to me, it's the most organic form of procuring meat. I want to know where it's coming from. I want to be part of the butchering process. I want to know the anatomy of those animals. And I also feel, obviously, the remorse whenever I do harvest something. I'm not a bloodlust person. And to be honest, most hunters are not bloodlust individuals. They have a lot of remorse. I mean, actively taking the life of something is not great. But to me, it's also a form of, it's just a natural instinct that we have. And that's how we got here. So whenever I had my kiddo, I told my wife, I want to make sure that she knows that this is our lifestyle. I have some great memories of our first deer hunt, and you have to really lower expectations. Take your child hunting. You're probably not going to harvest anything, but you're going to have a great time out there.
That's an important preface conversation.
Yes, have fun with them. No expectations at all. I mean, just be happy if you see an animal that you're actually pursuing in that point. But just knowing that they're out there with you. I mean, we had plenty of snacks for one, and we used acorn caps, and we have pictures of them on our nose. I mean, just little things like that, just making it fun for the child. But then, every time, I would come home from hunting, she would ask, wow, did you see anything? And I would tell her, I'd show her photos and really build up that interest. Fishing was easier to take, obviously, because she's, as any child is, you can take them fishing. She had a better attention span the younger she was than she does now. But it was also, you catch a fish, you let them play with it, you talk about what they're eating, you dig up worms before you go, so now you're getting your hands dirty. You're finding that food source, that form of bait to provide that food source for you. And we would bring the fish home and eat them. And she thought that was amazing that she was providing food for the family. And still to this day, just this past Sunday, we went fishing. She's like, Dad, we're going to eat these, right? I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, okay, because I'm not going if we're not. I'm like, I love you, kiddo. That's exactly right. We're not going if we don't keep them and eat them. Sorry for all your catch and release folks up north. And we don't fly fish much, but we do occasionally. So to me, it was just, really tying that in back to health and wellness, back
Mm.
into our food source and just providing for our family and for our friends. You know, if we have extra bounty, by all means, we love sharing our meat. We love sharing everything from our garden. To me, it's that community-based idea of sharing what you're capable of procuring on your own. And I think if your kiddos watch you do that, I really think that conditions them to really understand the value of nature.
Jeffrey, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I certainly agree with everything you were just saying, Jameson, about that kind of direct connection to the natural world, having responsibility around where your food comes from. I came to hunting later in life, as Rachel mentioned in the intro, and my kids haven't really taken to it. I can get them out fishing with me, but hunting, they've both tried a few times, not too interested in it. But they have a different relationship even to venison on the table when they know where it came from, kind of what the cost of it was. There's a deeper level of gratitude. So I think that's I concur with all of that around the direct connection to the natural world. You know, I also think, you know, when we think about it being Mental Health Awareness Month and how outdoor recreation and maybe hunting and fishing in a particular way help address that. I there's a lot that goes into our current mental health crisis, especially for younger Americans. A lot of sources of anxiety and stress, but I think we have to acknowledge just the omnipresent influence of the internet, of social media, of having these little supercomputers in our pockets that provide a portal into the whole world, really, and all of the struggles and challenges and painful things that exist in the world. And this is maybe, I mean, I guess I'll just say I don't think we are designed as humans for around the clock input. Um, and that's something that's maybe lost on us
Yeah.
in this modern life. But you know, I think of you going to the local Meijer store, right? It could be high noon or 3 a.m. and that place would look exactly the same. You would have no idea if it was the middle of the night or not. And that is such a foreign experience for most of human history. Like most of our human ancestors lived with these circadian rhythms of day and night. There was a limit to how much input there could be. And I think a lot of us, and especially our young people, are living with an information overload. Um, and you think of some of the social stressors around social media and those factors too. It just leads to an overwhelming amount of stress. And so part of what I think is beautiful about hunting and fishing as a form of outdoor recreation is that it narrows your field of vision. You really have to pay attention. You know, if you have to be still watching for a game animal to come in, or you have to be hyper focused watching a fly drift down the water, you know, the world just kind of narrows in scope, and I think there's something really restorative about just shutting out the noise. And hunting and fishing do that in a particular way. I would imagine, you know, birding and some other, you know, outdoor pursuits could provide that same kind of narrow focus. But for me, that's come in a unique way from hunting and fishing.
Jeffrey, you brought this up, and I want to seize on it because I think it's an important conversation. I concur with you about. I don't think we are designed or evolved to get that continuous that input. We need spaces, and thinking about mental wellness. That's been a journey for our family, for me personally, and you know, we practice Buddhism, and I try on my daily practice to every morning that I possibly can to get up and, you know, start off with some yoga and then some meditation. And what has been fascinating for me in my personal journey has been as I do that, there's this space in my cognition, in my thinking, between me and my emotions, me and my reactions to the outside world. And when I don't do that, like that space gets closer and I find myself having a harder time to differentiate myself from that information that's coming in and my reaction to it. So knowing, Jeffrey, that you're a pastor and think about, that a contemplation and that conscientiousness, tell me about your perspective on that, and how the outdoors gives us space for that. And then additionally, what's the connection there with having broad open spaces and public lands that are dedicated to that?
Mhm. Yeah, boy, we could do 100 podcast episodes on that probably, right?
Let's set it up.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate I really appreciate you talking about your own personal spiritual practice and how contemplation kind of opens up that space for you. Um, and I love that language of just getting some separation between like you and your emotions. Um, yeah, that feels very similar for me in my own practices and in how I try to help other people maybe live a more holistic and balanced life. My wife is also a mental health professional. She works in a middle school as a mental health provider, and so we have a lot of these conversations. And I'm not trained in that field, but we are physical embodied beings, and so I think of that dopamine hit that comes when you check your social media feed and you get a bunch of likes and comments on a post that you really invested in, and okay, you get that dopamine bump, right? And then on the opposite side of that, we have cortisol as these stress hormones in our lives that we carry within our bodies. And if you never get a break from these kind of cycles of chemical inputs of fluctuating between the feel good ones and the feel crummy ones, and that's all contingent on these external factors of what's happening on your social media feed or outside of yourself. um, yeah, you lose that ability, I think, to get a little bit of separation and to even just physically process them along with kind of mentally, emotionally, spiritually processing them. So, as we were thinking about today's conversation, I went back to an article I'd read back in 2019 about a study done in Frontiers of Psychology, which is a professional journal in the field of psychology. And it was the first kind of major study to look at how long you have to be in nature to experience some of the mental health benefits of it.
Mhm.
And what that study came back with was saying that in as little as 20 to 30 minutes, there is a dramatic drop in that cortisol stress hormone in the participants in the study. And that out after 30 minutes, there was kind of diminishing returns on that. Um, and and for me, that's just remarkable, to think
Mhm.
it. And one of the keys in that study was no electronics, right? No smartphone, no screens. That was an essential component of it. But to spend 20 to 30 minutes in a natural environment without any digital inputs provided this noticeable and dramatic drop in those stress hormones. Uh, and so I think part of what public lands and water do is it provides those kinds of opportunities for everybody. You can go to a city park and spend 20 minutes just sitting in that space without any external inputs and have a measurable improvement in your well-being. And I think it is just all tied together of our mental, emotional, physical selves. Um, they're all bound up together, and uh, for me, those are the kind of studies that I just go, well, yeah, of course, right?
Yeah.
But to be able to have some peer-reviewed, measurable markers of that benefit is pretty cool.
I want to get over to you, Jameson, on that, but I agree with you, and I think that's why I brought this up, because you think about you think about our wellness, our mental wellness, and the importance of having that space of contemplation, whatever that is for you. You know, Buddha sat under a banyan tree. Jesus went out in the garden to pray, and there's a consistency there about time and nature and what that does for our cognition. And now we have science catching up and having study after study after study that says, yes, you got to have it. And by the way, leave your phone at home. You know, what does that say to you, Jameson?
Then I think we have some similar stories here where my wife is also in the holistic field as a Reiki practitioner. She has just completed this last year, her 500 hour of yoga training, more focused on trauma-informed yoga. She's created this amazing workbook that she's trying to get this working with some local therapists that takes people through a 3-month program of step-by-step of how to work through your trauma, utilizing yoga, breath work, meditation, everything we just talked about, disconnect. And she has been working with some local therapists. So it's also something, you know, she's been going down this alley or this road now for about 4 or 5 years, which has opened my eyes substantially to the holistic field. I mean, we've had some great discussions on health and wellness as far as physical exercise and our food consumption, but really that mental stability is easily and often overlooked because we're so glued to our technology. And the simple things of, you know, my daughter and I just had this conversation the other day because she gets car sick. And what you were talking about a few minutes ago, Jamie, is, you know, our bodies are not developed to take on that much information so quickly. And it's as simple as driving your car down the road. I mean, hasn't been very long since we're not programmed to go 60 miles an hour down anything and have all this stuff flashing by us and signs and lights and horns and us trying not to hit things. I mean, that right there is sensory overload for a lot of people. And we're so used to it, but I'm really curious how much cortisol level even that produces. Just the simple act of driving anywhere. And then so you go somewhere and you already have those stressors on high alert as you're trying to take in more information and deal with more outside resources. So, I mean, you know, that the body is just we're not ready for that. So to me, it's imperative that we utilize our spaces. And that's what I've told my daughter. I said, Millie, you may have to utilize, you know, outside time more often than some people just to kind of decompress yourself, to disconnect, to be able to go back into the vehicle. And that's what we do. We have to take stops so that she can. And we try to stop somewhere, a natural setting where she can take it, observe it in, kind of take some good breath. We do breath work and she's ready to hop back in the car. But I think it's important for everyone to understand where their threshold is at. And, you know, humans, we're amazing potentials. We can push ourselves to extremities. But when we do, we also pay for that. And we have to realize where our thresholds are at and even scale it back a little bit from there so that we don't go overboard and overdo it. So that we're always have that healthy energy level mentally and physically to take on any new task that may be before us. So I really give a lot of that benefit to my wife, really raising a lot of that concern within myself and me watching her progress through it. It's funny, you know, she actually, through a lot of her work and what Jeffrey was talking a little bit about earlier about that neurofocus. This past year, you know, I love to be hunting. I mean, I love being in the woods, and it's not the act, like I said earlier, about taking anything home. I just like being there to observe too. I mean, I see so many awesome things in the woods. But this year I got more into small game hunting, particularly squirrel hunting, just to get out there, walk around, fine tune my skills, more time in the woods. But I realized something, and I brought it back and I told my wife after some of our conversations about focus is, you know, that predatory instinct that humans have, you know, our eyes are here in front of our heads for a particular reason. Whenever I actually see a squirrel, in this instance in a distance, and I zero in on that squirrel, there could be a bear next to me and I would have no idea because I am so focused. It's like watching a cat stalk up on something. You can do jumping jacks next to it and it's not going to pay any attention to you. And that's how I felt, but it also felt so freeing at the same time. You know, whether I was able to get up to that animal or not, regardless of that, whenever that was over, that experience was over, I was like, wow, that was fun. I mean, that was just gratifying and freeing. It was like almost like a form of meditation. Even though you're so hyper-focused, there's just that absolute disconnect from everything else around me that we need. So that's my example.
Well, I just kind of want to reel us back. We've had some great conversation, and I could continue this for days, probably, or 100 episodes. Can we reel back and talk a little bit about what Backcountry Anglers is nationally, regionally, and
Yeah, I'll start off nationally, 30,000-foot view, and then I'll give it to Jeffrey to talk about the Michigan chapter up there. So Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is a national conservation organization, started in 2004, since our 20th anniversary this year, started in Oregon around a campfire with the idea of, we have all these other great conservation orgs that are focused on elk or ducks or deer or pheasants. We're very critter specific. But, especially out west, and it's just as important as it is here, and I'll get to that in a moment. But who's protecting our public lands and our public waters and our access to them, and then the habitat on those public lands? Because there's a lot of great work being done on private, which is absolutely important. But who's doing it on public? And that's where the idea of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers was kind of morphed. And then here we are 20 years later, and we have chapters in every state. We have, we're 25,000 members strong. And what that looks like at a state level now is, each state has a chapter. They have chapter board leaders throughout the whole state. And what we do, and I'll get to what my position is here in a moment too, but what our chapters do is, they tackle those isolated, those localized issues, whether it be in Michigan as an example. It may be policy issues. It may be, oh, hey, we're going to get some people out here for a public lands pack out, which is our way of, let's go pick up some trash. Let's leave this better than what we found it, which is what people should be doing anyway. But we do kind of, rally the troops. We go out there, we might pack out, a dumpster load of trash in a day. And then while we're doing it, we can also create a great network. You get people outside, bring the kids outside, teach them about nature and the importance of taking care of what we have. And then we'll have, a lot of maybe R3 events. We might teach people how to shoot at a shotgun range, or how to scout for deer on public land, or where the public land is even at. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. We have a lot of fundraising events around different chapters, and it's that fundraising money goes straight back into conservation one way or the other. And so what I do is I'm a chapter coordinator, and I cover 7 of our states. I cover Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, and then way over in Oklahoma. And that's kind of right now, it's kind of, so a couple of those states are kind of temporary until we can find some new staff. But I thoroughly enjoy having conversations almost every day about being in the outdoors, about conservation, hunting and fishing stories. But knowing that behind the scenes, I'm helping all these awesome leaders make this impact on their localized areas. And so, I feel like my impact is very widespread throughout this entire state. And it really gratifies me that I'm able to actually help these folks kind of cultivate that. So, we're membership based. It's $35 a year. We have different membership increments all the way up to lifetime members. We get some really sweet packages or, items for being a lifetime member. I think Jeffrey is. You're a lifetime, aren't you? Yeah. Yep. So, and like I said, all that money goes right back into conservation, whether it's, paying for staff working in conservation. But we have folks that live in DC. We're 501c3, so we're not lobbyists, but we're there to stay in tune with any federal legislation coming down the line, right? Recovering America's Wildlife Act, the Great American Outdoors Act, the Mining and Antiquities Act. A lot of things that are happening right now. And that's one thing we're able to do is provide all of our members and supporters, don't have to be a member, at least a voice in what's going on. So we have, we keep people informed. We have what's called a take action notice. You can go to our website and you can see, oh, I don't want this to happen. So you can take action and send a letter to your local rep. Or, hey, this is amazing. I want this to happen. So you can take action and send a letter to your local rep. We provide those tools for everybody to have a voice in conservation. And we also have a great podcast out there by a guy named Hal Herring. He has some amazing folks on there. It's called BHA Podcast and Blast. Talks about conservation efforts around the country. And we all thoroughly have fun while we're doing this. It's, I as a parks director, I really miss that localized community. But I really feel like I have a much broader impact on conservation, getting people really into the outdoors with this position. So that's kind of BHA to 30,000-foot view, and we certainly couldn't do it without all the volunteers. They are the backbone of this organization. So then I'll kind of pass over to Jeffrey then, and he can talk more about the Michigan chapter up there.
Yeah, thanks, Jameson. Yeah, the Michigan chapter was founded in 2016. I've been involved as a volunteer since 2018 and on the board for a little over a year. And as Jameson said, rather than being focused on a particular species like a lot of conservation groups are, BHA really has a singular focus on public lands and water. We care about conserving those spaces, about preserving access and helping people understand how to best utilize them. So, your organization does a lot of work, with private landowners, which is a huge component of a healthy ecosystem. We have to take both public and private into account when we think about how to conserve our wildlife. And but that's not an option for a lot of people, to kind of work hands-on and manage a private piece of land. And Michigan provides a remarkable heritage around public land and water, especially on that water side. We're really unique within the United States, with just the incredible different ecosystems that we have available to us, and some really citizen-friendly laws, about how you can get out and make use of that. And so a lot of what we try to do is education around that as well. I think there's a lot of people who maybe don't know the difference between, what can you do in a state park versus what can you do in a national forest. We know they're both public lands, but there's different rules and different opportunities. And so, we want to be a resource for people to get out and explore this amazing heritage that we each have as citizens of this country and of this state, to get out and make use of the beautiful natural world that we are privileged to live in.
Said that really well. And we're in final moments, but I think this is a really important tie-up because, we talked about how we need these outdoor spaces for our physical wellness, for our mental, emotional wellness. And if we need these spaces, we need to be stewards of these spaces, which is what we are all in this doing. That's conservation, taking responsibility for the natural resources, the natural spaces that we need. And BHA as a steward of that, what is coming up in the near future that you'd like to point people's attention to?
I know in Michigan, if you don't mind, Jeffrey, I'll just talk about a couple of events. We have a fireside chat coming up soon with Chad Stewart, who is basically the ungulate management specialist over deer, elk, and moose. That'll be at the Lansing Brewing Company. We just posted that event today, and the email will go out here shortly. I know we'll be having a full draw film tour showing there in Grand Rapids at the Wealthy Theater, if I remember correctly. It'll be on July 13th. That has not been published yet, but stay tuned. We'll definitely have that. The Full Draw Film Tour has been a national tour of a lot of short archery hunting films. And it typically has a great following, but this year they're doing something a little bit different where they're allowing affiliates to host those shows. And they reached out to BHA to host the show there in Grand Rapids. So we're excited to do so. And then July 19th through the 20th, something that we've done in Michigan now for a number of years is have an annual state rendezvous, which is an opportunity for everybody to come together, camp out for a couple of nights, have a lot of field skills, have some education sessions, have some fun raffle prizes, have some kid activities, and just have a chance to kind of meet a lot of like-minded folks, talk about our stewardship, grassroots stuff that we have coming up, make some plans. And so, yeah, that's always a fantastic event. And that is at, Jeffrey, please help me out here. I don't have that one listed as far as the location, and I can't remember the name of the Rod and Gun Club.
Yeah, because you put me on the spot. Looking Glass. That's
Yeah,
a
there we
Looking
go.
Glass
Yeah,
River
thank you.
Sportsman Club just north of Lansing.
There we go. That's it. So yeah, that's what we have coming up in Michigan. Down here in Kentucky, we're going to have a big regional event called Small Game Boot Camp. And that'll be with a guy named Kevin Murphy, he runs Small Game Nation, and he's been on a lot of the Meat Eater episodes. Kevin is proclaiming, Ronella, our Meat Eater guys, proclaiming the world's greatest small game hunter. So we're doing more of like a small game oriented event where we'll teach people about conservation, small game habitat, which certainly does benefit every sort of wild animal out there, wild creature. We're going to have a wild game cook-off featuring rabbit. We have a lot of great initiatives going on that day in Paducah, Kentucky on June the 8th. So you can find information on that. It's a long trek, but if you have any people down in this area, by all means, share it with them. But you can find that information on the BHA page under events if you just scroll over to June. So yeah, that's some of our biggest stuff happening. Indiana, I know some of the folks maybe living in the southern part of Michigan. Indiana has a lot of different events. Ohio usually has a lot of events. Illinois has several events over in the northeast corner around Chicago. So if you want to be involved, I mean, certainly look at Michigan first. But if you live close to the border of one of the other states, a lot of other states have some great opportunities for you too.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I was just about to ask you where our listeners could go to learn more information, but I think you got it covered there.
It is backcountryhunters.org. And then everything you need to know as far as your take actions, getting involved with your chapters. And there's a lot of great information on that website.
Love that.
Well, thanks again for being here, both of you, Jeffrey, Jameson. It's been a pleasure. Can't wait to talk to you again and more. Next, we will be talking with Matt Bain from Grand Valley Metro Council and Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds to discuss rivers and biology. Rachel mentioned earlier our MICOR grant, and ELGRO is one of our partners for that. So excited to talk to him. So please join us right back here on Friday, May 17th. And thanks for being a part of Conservation Fridays.